Aaron, thank you very much. We appreciate your perseverance in the face of some technical challenges there, but thank you for your thoughts and your insights this morning. We have another keynote presentation for you, ladies and gentlemen, before we take a break for morning tea. And I suppose the title of this presentation goes to the very heart of why we're here this morning. It's called Mining Critical Risk Management in 2025. What does good look like? This will be presented by Christian Young, an address that will challenge us to think about the future of risk management in mining and what best practice might look like in a rapidly changing environment. So would you please welcome Christian, a leading expert who assists the industry and inspectorate in Queensland on critical controls in the mining industry. Christian Young. Just before Christian starts, we will have an opportunity for some questions at the end as well. So once again, we'll open up the Slido portal for you as well. Hopefully we'll get that QR code or the instructions flashed up on the screen as well. And time permitting, we'll get some questions to Christian a little bit later. But for now, all yours.
Thank you. As a North Queenslander, thanks for turning on the weather too, by the way. It's been absolutely sensational this week. We're just having some clicker challenges. Aaron, well done, mate, getting through that. Just jump to the next one, thanks. So, if you could rate your understanding of critical risk management from a scale of 0, know nothing, to 10, I'm an expert, nothing more to add, where would you rate yourself? I might just count down from 10. Is there any 10s in here? Any 9s? 8s? 7? 6? And 5 or under? Yep, so maybe about 50% of the room. Excellent. There's no 10s. I'm not a 10 either. I'll share with you today what I've been learning across the last number of years. Yeah, jump on to the next one, which is a nice segue. So I've been in mining safety 25 years, started as a safety graduate at Oaky Creek coal mine in Queensland, which was owned by MIM way back then, and then moved around, worked for different players, Cobar, Cannington, BHP, did my BHP time. Probably a lot of us in the room have also done their BHP time. And then for the last 6 years, I started my own health and safety consultancy out of Queensland, and we're now supporting across Australia a little bit internationally. And I've had the opportunity to do a lot of work in critical risk management projects for a number of players. Some of you can see there, some who aren't up there. And so what I'm looking to share today is both some learnings from a technical perspective, and we use the ICMM framework, which a lot of you will be familiar with, but then also some of the practical, the how-to, because I think that's the thing that we can do better at, and that's what I want to share today. Jump to the next one, please. So this will be a rhetorical question. We can't throw this one out on the table, but if we've all done some critical risk management stuff, I'm guessing most of you have in the room, critical controls, verifications, bow ties, clearly we're not getting it right, are we? Because we're still having these issues, these incidents. And probably a reflective question, which we might unpack later, is, well, what do you think are the sticking points here? Where is it going wrong? Is there one thing that you think, look, if I could just solve that, that would actually be the thing that would unlock the value, unlock us moving forwards. And maybe through the framework and information I share today, there might be a one thing that pops out. And that actually is a nice segue. There's some worksheets there on the table, which you'll see. So everyone on the table will need one, because we're going to go through that when we go through the framework. So if you want to proactively hand that around to the people on your table, that would also be nice. Yes, please. Okay, so hands up. Who's seen this framework? Just so I can understand, just nice and high. All right, just about everyone. Okay, so you remember the genesis, what is it, 2015, 2016, maybe some people in the room were involved in this. The major players got together and said, well, look, we're all kind of doing this fatality prevention, multi-fatality prevention. Why don't we kind of align with the one way? And this is where the ICMM framework came from. This is the model and the structure that we'll use to go through the rest of I'll guess what the time is, the rest of the framework, and we're going to go through some how-to bits. And so I still like the framework. It's good on the what, but not necessarily the how. And this is a really, really busy slide. If we start thinking about the how, here's some examples of artefacts that could be produced by your site, by your organisation. That is the how. And this is what we'll have a bit of a chat about today. So for some people in the room, you might have all of this and you've absolutely nailed it. Some people might be at the start of their journey, and some people might be somewhere on the line. And so hopefully, when we're going through this how, there's some practical things you can take away, which is the purpose of the worksheet. So planning. So we're going to start with the framework. The first thing is about the plan. Like any project, we have a plan. If we're going to do it the first time, then what's our implementation plan? What's our strategy? What are the things we need to consider? Or if we're at BAU, so business as usual stage, what's our plan to maintain? And what does that look like? And have we thought through all of the different aspects? I'm not going to read this. Again, you've got the slides. You can take this away. I think you get it in the pack after this. Happy to share. But does your plan consider some of these level of aspects? I've seen some people get software right, and I've seen them get it really, really wrong. Have we really thought through before we buy the off-the-shelf software? Just a little word of caution there. So if we're thinking about the plan, and this is going to move now into the first line on the worksheet that's in front of you, is there a plan where we've defined the key responsibilities? Have we defined how we do critical risk management within our business? Is that in our risk management standard, or do we have a separate document there? Do we have things like the key roles defined? And the key, what are they required to do? Are there some toll gates for those people? I might just leave it at that, because I want to do this really, really quick. We don't have a lot of time. So I'll just invite you now just to have a look at that slide. Give yourself a rating. You see the column that says, what's your rating out of 10? So 10 is you've nailed it, nothing more to add. 0 is there's nothing there. Give yourself a rating and just think, is there one thing that there might be a tweak or something within your organisation, something to check? It could be an action. It could be an idea. Just quickly jot that down and we're going to jump through. So give you about 30 seconds to do that, and we're going to jump through the next bit. Okay, just show of hands, anyone less than 5 in relation to planning? Show of hands. Okay, some good honest people, so maybe a third. So I'm going to assume then everyone's 50% or better in terms of having a plan defined, who needs to do what. Excellent. So we'll move through the next phase now, which is around identifying material unwanted events, or critical risks, or there might be some other organisations in the room call it different things. I think some organisations call them PUEs, primary unwanted events. Not sure what the language is within your particular business. And what we're looking to produce is what are the list of the critical few? Out of everything that could be important, what are the things that are going to be really, really important that we want to end up assigning critical controls to? And then all of the aspects that come after that. So we're really, if we use this pretty crude drawing, how do we filter out of all of the stuff to the things that's really, really important? And you already might have a way forwards, and you might have already broken through that within your business. You might not have yet defined it. And one way that we can do this, or could do this as an idea, is I assume everyone's got a risk matrix in their business, which has likelihood and consequence. So what's pictured on here is we'll call it a fictional example of a consequence matrix or a consequence table. So we can see there we've got on the vertical column, we go from negligible to catastrophic. So you might have level 1 to 5, and then we can see the different consequence types across the top there, across that top row. Probably familiar with what you've got. And so the idea is, or the term in this space is materiality criteria. So what is the threshold, the red line, if you like, looking at this particular thing, this particular table? Where's your red line for each consequence type? And by defining the red line, we're saying anything that's equal to that consequence or more, that's an in-scope consequence type and level. Any types of events that could be that's likely going to be a material unwanted event for us. Anything below the red line, we're not saying it's not important, but we've got other things already in play. And if I had to prioritise, it's going to be those things above the red line. Does everyone get that as an idea? Yep, and we can see that depending on the consequence type, it mightn't be a flat line. So do you think a BHP would have the same materiality criteria as a small fabrication workshop somewhere in the back streets of Perth? Probably not, hey? So we know that the red line, the materiality criteria, is going to be related to the context of the organisation. So that's what we're invited to do. before we go to filter out of all of the risks, well, what's our red line? I'm not sure if your organisation has done it. And then once we have defined it, obviously it's not going to be represented as a picture on your consequence table. It will be written into your, I've got to get the terms right, mine safety management system. In Queensland we call it SHMS, and it threw some people out yesterday, so the safety management system, let's just call it that. So does this mean that single fatalities, potential single fatality consequences, will be a material unwanted event? Who says yes? Who says no? So it's going to depend, it's kind of a trick question, it's going to depend on what you define as material, doesn't it? So your red line might be set at single fatality, or you might set your red line at multiple fatality. Does everyone understand the distinction there? We had an interesting conversation yesterday about material risks and principal hazards, but I don't think we have time today. So once we've done that, I'm going to keep moving forwards. Sorry, a bit of delay. Who uses broad brush risk assessments within their business? Just a show of hands. Okay, maybe a third of the room. So what's a process, the broad brush risk assessment, think just a rack with some extra columns, is a process that we can use that helps us formalise the identification of those incidents that meet and exceed our red line. So what that looks like, or what we'd be looking for if we're supporting an organisation, say, well, how did you identify your list of critical few? They said, look, we use a broad brush risk assessment where we've got a list, some key stakeholders within the business. We looked across our business, all our geographic areas, all of our processes and activities that we do, and this is our return value of what is material for us. And what I probably should have mentioned on the other slide, in this world, have you noticed we haven't talked about likelihood in terms of what's our red line and what's material? So the idea is it doesn't matter if this thing could happen one every 1,000 years or every day, it's still something we don't want to have happen. And so materiality and what's material is based on consequence. It doesn't consider likelihood. And it doesn't consider your existing controls in terms of is this thing material. Where we do use existing controls and likelihood is you see the far right-hand side, which is that helps to drive prioritisation. So if I've got 30 things that might be material, that's what the first column there, that coloured one is. It doesn't have to be like this, it could be in software. Once I've got these 30, how do I prioritise? Where do I start first? That's where we can use our likelihoods and our residual risk rankings. So wrapping out this bit, because I'm going to move to you for a self-assessment, we've talked about defining your red line. Potentially a broad brush risk assessment is the process and the mechanism you can use to formalise that. Inside the broad brush risk assessment, that's how we identify and match who's going to own these risks. And also I'd be looking for, well, if I've said I've got 30 critical risks, does my safety management system have a document for each of those where I talk about how I manage that risk? So I'm going to hand back to you, give you 30 seconds to jump onto your worksheet, give yourself a rating out of 10, and is there a one idea, a takeaway or an action that's just fallen out of that module? So I'll give you 30 seconds to go into that. Okay, were there any 7s or above? Show of hands, any 7s or above for this? Okay, maybe, yeah, pretty good, maybe 10% of the room. Any that were 4 or below? No one. Okay, so it looks like we're in the middle band. So it looks like we've done some pretty cool stuff so far. So the next phase is where I kind of deviate a little bit, not from the process, but actually say, well, I've done my broad brush risk assessment. I know what my red line is. I've got my critical risks. Now I actually have to find the tool that I'm going to use to analyse each of those critical risks. So I've just used that term there. And what we're looking to do is take each of those critical risks and perform a pretty good deep dive on that. So what's a popular tool that just about everyone uses for analysing critical risks? Anyone want to throw it out there? What do you use? Bowtie? Yep. So hands up, who uses Bowtie in their business? Yeah, probably, okay, 60% of the room. I don't mind it. There's obviously other tools as well. The formatting didn't quite work on this transfer. So just so we're all on the same page when we're talking about bow tie, there's a very, very simple representation of a bow tie analysis. We've got our loss of control event in the middle. You can see our causes over on the left, our consequences on the right, and then we have our preventative controls there, mitigating controls, and we have some pathways that we're looking to do. And obviously the idea, the more controls and the stronger controls we can have on those pathways, the less chance that pathway is going to get realised. So I was talking about this yesterday too in the session. There's one thing that as soon as I see a bow tie, and I look for one thing, and that straight away tells me, is this bow tie in the money or is it not? Or at least starting to. A few of you might have seen this representation before. So we've got a blue line there, which is essentially, what's it called there, from our safe to unsafe zone, whether we agree with that term or not. But you can see there the orange dots are represented as, that's like a near miss, a high potential incident. Yep, so we went out of our safe zone, but we could recover and come back. Then we can see going past the red zone, we've got the little star, it's, okay, we've gone to unrecoverable. Okay, it's just going to be, whatever's going to happen, it's going to play out. And what we're looking to do when we're thinking about bow ties is the centre of the knot is that point in time we've gone from in control to out of control. So if I'm thinking about, let's say an example is the activity is working at heights. Does anyone want to share what might be the centre of the knot if the work activity is about working at heights? So what's that point in time where we've gone into the unrecoverable? I want to throw something out there? It's not your question, by the way. Anyone want to have a go? No? Fall? Who said fall? Thank you. Perfect. So does everyone understand that? So it's when I'm falling, that's the point in time we've gone from that system's in control to out of control. So when I'm looking at bow ties, that's what I'm looking for. It's a loss of control of the process, or it's a loss of control of the activity. So if I see a bow tie that says, in the centre of the knot says working at heights, or it says electrocution, which is a consequence, or it says vehicle collision, then straight away we know we've gone a little bit astray on our starting point for a bow tie. So in the table, in the slides there's some extra examples. Has anyone seen these terms before? Act, object, system, when we're thinking about controls? Just a show of hands. All right, it's okay if you haven't. Some of you might have seen it yesterday. So the idea is here, it's a different lens to our hierarchy of controls. So an act is a human action, pretty straightforward. Object is something that doesn't require a human to do whatever it needs to do. So what could be an example of an object control? Doesn't require a human. Any ideas? A guard? Perfect. Anyone got another example? An object control? Beg your pardon? Almost. Or that could relate to the last one there. System. So a system's a combination, isn't it? So emergency stop's a good example. We've got an object, but a person needs to do something with it, don't they? So which of those three would you think would be the most effective type of control if you could choose one of those? Object, because it doesn't have a human involved. So an interesting reflection point is think about our traditional hierarchy of controls and our engineering controls. How many of those engineering controls are actually systems? They still need someone to do something. Are they actually true object controls? And specific measurement auditable. Look, I've been saying yesterday, I've been guilty of that in the past. If I choose my risk assessment, if I read that control, is it specific, measurable and auditable? Do I know what that thing is? Can I go out and audit that thing as it's described? Who's seen this framework before? Show of hands. Okay. This one's a very interesting concept, and I think we've got time. We might be able to have a quick play around with this. So we can see here that this is showing that these things that we've traditionally called controls, potentially some of them could be support activity. So a support activity are those things that are designed to maximise the health of a control, but are not necessarily a control in and of itself. And a verification activity is those things that we do that checks on the health of a control. So if you think about a support activity, something that supports the health of a control, anyone think of an example of what could be a support activity?
Administrative control.
Beg your pardon?
Administrative control.
Administrative control, what would be an example? Yep, a procedure. Yep, so a procedure is not really a direct control, is it? So it's something that supports people being able to do what we want them to do. And verification activity, what's an example of that? An audit, yep, a report, etc. So what I might do, make it interactive. I'll give everyone sort of 2 minutes. It's going to be hard because you might have even introduced yourself to the people on the table. I'm going to head back to the table and give you 2 minutes to take alcohol and drug testing and apply it to this framework. So let's say it's randomised alcohol and drug testing, and that's what we call our control. So I'll give you 2 minutes, have a look at that framework and see where you think you end up. Okay? Over to you. All right, so we'll keep moving on. Show of hands, did any table put alcohol and drug testing as a control? Anyone put as a control? Yep. 1, 2. Did any tables put it as a support activity? Just show of hands. Okay. Any put it as a verification activity? Yep. And did any not even have it as a control? We just threw it out the window, which we won't talk about that. So that's an interesting framework, isn't it? And the reflection is, I wonder how many of the existing controls, if we do call them that, that are within your organisation at the moment, would they actually all come out as a true control within that framework? And we've done some work with some clients. We look at their bow ties, we apply this framework and some definitions, and it's like 40% of their controls are gone straight away. So I think that's an interesting takeaway. Then how many of us do control effectiveness assessments as part of our bow tie process? So not on our critical controls, but even before we get to, yep, down the end there, before we get to determining is this thing a critical control or not. And I will go backwards, just bear with me. Because by doing control effectiveness assessments, those controls that we see there can become colour-coded. And we can see dark greens are really, really good. We might see some reds, we might see some ambers. So we can actually see from our pathways how good is our suite that we have in place. You know, I might have 5 controls there on this one, but if I haven't done control effectiveness, I might say, yeah, all good, do some control effectiveness and they're all red. So therefore, maybe we need to do something around that pathway. Or I might have only 1 there, but it's a dark green, which is highly adequate, and I might be okay with that. So I'm going to keep going. And then I assume that whose organisation has a framework for determining a critical control. Can I see a show of hands? All right, maybe 10%. If you don't have one, I'd probably suggest you go down the pathway. There's an example here. And so we've got some simple tests in this framework. I'm not going to unpack it too much. One is it a control? You know, we've just gone through that. Is it a support activity? If it's a monitoring activity? If it is, well, we don't even consider that. Just go over there, you know, it's something else, it's not a control. If it passes that test, does it meet our minimum control effectiveness criteria? Wouldn't it make sense that if I'm going to choose things that are critical control, I probably want to choose those things that are highly adequate or very good? Yep, I probably don't want to have a control that has 50% effectiveness. And then there's some other tests after that. And we, again, not based on science, but based on practicality, we suggest to our clients a maximum of 5 critical controls per material unwanted event. We have seen some organisations go beyond that, and they've created this big behemoth that has become out of control. For example, there's one organisation, they did 28,000 verifications in 12 months. They're global, but that's a lot, isn't it? Not sure how much value. Okay, so rounding out, analysing the critical risks. So on your worksheet, this would be covering controls and critical controls. So you can see there in terms of things we'd be looking for, you know, there's a one-to-one relationship between the material unwanted event and the risk, generically a one-to-one. Some things around controls. We'll talk about control failure modes a little bit later. So I'll hand back to you. Quick self-assessment. So this is covering off controls and critical controls. How would you rate your organisation? And is there a one thing that fell out of that that could be something for your organisation to have a look at? Okay, we'll keep moving forward. I'm conscious of the clock and I'm the person before morning tea. So once we now have our critical controls, it kind of makes sense that we want to take some time to define what does good look like for the operation of this critical control. Yeah, that makes sense, isn't it? This is the thing that's really, really important. It's going to stop these really, really bad things happening. So it makes sense for me to go through and define everything I expect of how I want this critical control to perform. And what's a tool that we can use to help us do this? I'm sure some people have within their businesses. Anyone want to shout it out? Anyone have something at the moment that they're using? A template? Who was that? Performance standard, thank you. Critical control performance standards. Who's got critical control performance standards in their business? Show of hands. All right, way less than half. So what is it? So it's a structured set of data where we go through and define, and we've got a number of different prompts there on how we want this critical control to perform. So one in terms of just how we want it to perform as part of operation, and we go through and answer some questions, and then we also, that's a nice segue into how we're going to verify on how we want it to operate. So that's where our criteria for our critical control verifications comes out. Obviously, don't have time to go through this in detail, but what I would say in terms of, in my opinion, what good looks like is, you can see here on this particular slide, the example, we've got some header information. You can see on the left-hand side, one of our prompts is functionality, and there's a bit of a prompt in, well, what does functionality mean? And then the next column over in terms of the requirement, we've answered that in that column. And then moving over, we've said, well, what are we doing right now to deliver on that requirement? Or what do we need to start doing? And the thing for me where the rubber hits the road is the next column over, which is the management system. So we say we do some stuff, but do we take the time to go and make sure we have a management system that ensures we do that forever and a day? So when we change out our people, we get new owners, whatever happens, are we still ensuring that those things that underpin the performance of the critical control are there and embedded? And ideally, we can map that to an owner as well, who's responsible for that management system. So if we have lots of critical controls, let's say our organisation has 150 critical controls, then often we'd then expect 150 performance standards, and each one of those performance standards will inform what the verification is. So it could be multiple verifications, could be one. This is, again, an area where you can sort of go a little bit astray and create lots of work, or you can get strategic on that. What I did want to say, so hands up, who's done an ICAM before in the room? All right, so we've all had that pain. So the goal of an ICAM is to get to the system, isn't it? What were the systems that failed and how do we fix the system? So wouldn't it make sense then that when I'm doing critical control verifications, I'm focusing on the system that supports the critical control as opposed to the front line? Does that one make sense? So where I've seen some critical control verifications go wrong is we'll ask the same question in the verification that 3 other people already ask as part of business as usual. So a frontline worker needs to do something, supervisors need to do something, potentially we do a hazard or housekeeping inspection, that also checks on the same thing, and then I see verifications have the same question again where 3 other people have asked the same thing. Wouldn't it make sense that we look deeper into the systems? So if that's something I can impart, if you do have performance standards, focus on the system checks as opposed to just the on-the-job, on-the-day checks. So back to self-assessment. Again, going to keep this moving to get there. So we talked about performance standards, we talked about the parameters. Give yourself a rating out of 10, and is there one aspect there that could be a takeaway or an idea from that? Give you 30 seconds for that. So out of interest, anyone less than 5 on that? Show of hands. Less than 5 on performance standards. Okay, pretty good. Is everyone saying they're above 5? Okay, so you're not too far away. So assign accountability. Look, this is pretty straightforward. I'm not going to spend too much time like this, but let's say I'm a new maintenance manager. I've just come into your organisation, and in theory, I own 5 critical risks. I might also own 10 critical controls. There might be a whole bunch of stuff you require of me. Does your system, does your organisation set me up for success for me to go and do that? Is there some type of onboarding? You know, do you train people that own risks and critical controls and what they're required to do? Do we actually mandate? Is it built into their job descriptions? Have we formalised appointments? So that's what that one, I'll let you do a quick self-assessment on the fly there. Even verifiers, do critical control verifiers know who they are? Is there some certain training or expectations or a standard they need to adhere to as part of doing that particular role? Implementation, I'm not going to spend too much time on here. You can see the notes, change management, lots of things in there, training. This is one I do like to ask. So if I went into your business today and went right out to the front line and talked to whoever it might be, and I asked them, all right, tell me the key material risks related to what you're doing, and tell me what the critical controls are, and how do you know if they're in place or not? Could they answer that? You know, have we got them to a point within your organisation where you can have the people on the front line being able to be present and aware of that? And if you haven't, what are some systems that can help, or what are some systems that can be tweaked to help get it to that point? And we joked yesterday, hopefully it's not just their take 5 and some posters. Hopefully we can do some extra things as well to set up the people on the front line for success in understanding that. There could be some people in the room who solve this. For me, I think one area is the work planning process. Certainly if we know ahead of time particular tasks that might have then some particular material risks and some particular critical controls, can we build that into our work planning process? That can flow on downstream. Certainly we don't want to wait on the job on the day and expect the frontline worker to identify the material risks and the critical controls. If we do, then I feel like the system isn't effective. SHMS MS, whatever it is, safety management system documentation, all of that, I'm not going to go into that. So, quick self-assessment on implementation. I think the key question there is, are your people set up for success to be able to know what the risks are and what the critical controls are? So I'll give you maybe 15 seconds there to just put a note in. Is there a little one-liner or something that might have fallen out of that? All right, everyone's done. So I'll keep moving around the pathway. Verification and reporting. So if we're doing lots of stuff, then ultimately we want to be able to, hopefully easily and simply understand where we're at. What is the status? And there's so many different reporting things out there. I've seen lots of different things. You probably have some stuff. To me, there's at least 2 buckets I want to understand. What's the status of my material risks? And what's the status of my critical controls? And obviously my material risk can be determined by critical controls as well. So this is the fictional, as you can see, table just put together, but a dashboard with context is probably not a bad example of a quick and easy thing to put together. This can cascade up, this can cascade down, everyone can sort of understand that. So that's, for example, for my material risks. I'll gloss over that one. And then also for our critical controls. Am I in a position, or is your organisation in a position where we know what the status is of our critical controls? Ideally, more than once every 6 months or 3 months, but that takes a bit of work to get to there. There's also lots of obviously process measures that we can look at as well. So, are we doing our verifications in accordance to schedule? Do our verifications have evidence uploaded? There's lots of those sort of processy checks that we can do. These are more outcome-based. And then the last point, before then I'll move into a bit of a summary, is if our data comes back, well, there's an interesting point here. Does your organisation embrace red in critical control verifications? That's probably a cultural thing. If we're getting some intelligence back that things aren't going according to plan or we need to make some improvements, is there a mechanism that your organisation has to then do something about that? I won't talk about this one too much again, I'm just conscious of time. We played around with this one in Queensland. So what's happening in the Queensland mining legislation now is everyone's required to have critical controls and embed them in their safety and health management system. They've got a year, so there's this flurry of activity that's happening over there. One of the ideas is, which this is looking to represent, well, how do I compare an actual significant incident where we actually had a critical control failure and I'm doing a critical control verification and I spot that, or I work out that we didn't reach our 90% training target, we only got to 80%. So both in theory there's an issue with a critical control, but are they as important as each other? And the idea within this particular framework, or this model here, is to say, well, why don't we just do what we do with incidents? What was the potential consequence and actual consequence? And then from that determination, work out what do we do? So that's a way we can compare proactive critical control failures with actual incidents in relation to critical controls and determining what to do moving forwards. And listed there lots of words about what does good look like. So I hand back to you for probably about 15 seconds around responding to inadequate performance. Does your business have some mechanisms? Is there some things that need to be tweaked or an idea that's there? Okay. So I mentioned at the start, this was a pretty busy slide. What we have done is we've worked around that framework and we've pretty much touched on all of these aspects, so I'll just repeat it back really, really quickly. So we start with the plan. We've got a plan for implementation and we've got a plan for business as usual, which has lots of different parameters inside of it. Once we've defined our plan, we then move through, identify our material unwanted events, and we worked out the first step, define our red line, what's material. That then lets me go to the broad brush risk assessment, which is a process where I formalise the identification of those material unwanted events. And from the broad brush risk assessment, you can see there's some stuff we might do in risk registers and some other activities, which I won't talk about too much here. For each critical risk, I then do a bow tie, and we can see that when I'm pulling together the bow tie, there's some challenges with controls, and there's some tests we can deploy to work out what's a true control. Once I'm through that, then there's a framework for identifying the critical controls, and ideally a maximum of 5 critical controls per material risk. Then bottom right-hand side, for each critical control we'll have a performance standard, which is how we want it to perform. From that will come our verification checklist, which are the things people go out and do in the field. Once I've designed all of that, we can see the bottom at 6 o'clock, we go and implement all of these activities, we assign our accountabilities, which is the bottom left, and then we start to get some information back from a reporting perspective, from our verifications, maybe some other touch points we've got, into reporting, and from our reporting we can work out, do we need to do something, or are we in control? And that's very, very quickly the framework. So I'm going to hand back to you on your table. It's probably get a bit noisy, but we'll try and make it really quick. 2 minutes to just quickly share what's your one thing out of all of that. If there's one key takeaway, what was it from that? So I'll just hand back to you now. 2 minutes. Just try and just keep it short. Just share on your table. We'll just get you to just start to close out that conversation. So that's great. I'm sure we could we do this in 2-day training course, and even then we don't go through it. So again, I apologise if this is really, really quick. What I also want to make mention of is I've given, I like to call it the 150%. Yep, so I give the 150% and then your organisation works out, well, what makes sense out of that based on a number of different factors. So we also can apply this to a small quarry and obviously a large mining organisation. So you can right size it. So all those different artefacts I've gone through, so for example, performance standard, you can certainly right size the performance standard. I'm not saying that the performance standard needs to be the 4-page thing. It can be a 1-pager or even a half-pager. Another way you can right size this is where you set your red line. So if I'm only starting out on this journey, does it make sense for me to set my red line at some level where I've created 40 critical risks, which would probably take me 4 years to get through? Do I set my red line higher, where I might only present 3 critical risks, and then just take those 3 critical risks, move them all through the framework, get it set and embedded, and then think about dropping my red line down? So there's a number of different things we can play with inside of this framework. So done that. All right, and then we have, I think, questions. I think I've done okay actually. We still got time for some questions. Also, I'll be around in the morning tea break if people want to chat more about this. Also, at the end of the day as well, I'll be around because I'm only over here for another day and a half. So happy to chat then. But any questions? Yes.
Thank you, Christian. We made the executive decision not to hold back the morning tea break because I'd be a brave man to get in between you lot and the coffee stand over there. We certainly don't want a critical incident here in the room and have to do one of your fancy bow tie diagrams. I'm learning a lot. But Christian's been good enough to hang around not only during that morning tea break and also there's going to be a more informal Q&A session after lunch. So if you want to tap into Christian's expertise and experience, then he has been good enough to make himself available throughout the rest of the program here today. So feel free to go and hit Christian up. But we're just going to break for morning tea at the moment. Before I let you go though, given that it's a pretty unique opportunity to have so many of you in the room today, we'd love to harness your collective experience this morning. And if you wouldn't mind going to the Slido app now, I think we're going to put the instruction up for you. Just one little bit of homework before you get some caffeine into you. Just this one question. What is your most pressing issue right now with regards to mine safety? So if you could hit that QR code and submit your answer, that would be great. Or as I mentioned, you can go to the website slido.com and put in that code. That will take you to the space as well. But if you could answer that question, and while you're doing that, would you please thank Christian for being with us this morning and sharing his insights with us. And as I mentioned, Christian's going to hang around for a bit, so if you wanted to ask a question, apologies for running out of time now, but there will hopefully be ample opportunity for you to go and ask Christian what you would like to ask him throughout the next couple of hours or so. I think you might be a busy man for the next little while, Christian. So thank you once again. We're going to break now until about 10:45. So if I could ask you to be back here for the resumption at 10:45, that would be great. In the meantime, enjoy the chance to connect with colleagues in the room and have a bite to eat and a tea or coffee as well. So thank you very much. See you soon.